Hello, my name is Fashalli. I'm a biomedical engineering student from Erlangen University, and in this video I'm gonna explain or review some of the architectures of neural network. First, let's start from the definition. What is neural network architecture? So a neural network architecture refers to the arrangement of neurons into layers and the connection patterns between layers, activation functions, and learning methods. And it determines how a network transforms its input into an output. I take the reference of this video from Medium article by James Lee, whom has taken the materials from Geoffrey Hinton's Neural Network for Machine Learning course. And these are some neural network architectures that we are going to review. There are 7 of it. Basically, the basic of neural network architectures, as far as I know, are these first three, and the others are like combination and the development of this. Yeah, we're gonna review all of it. Start from the first one. The first one is perceptrons, or also known as feed-forward neural network. So this perceptrons is considered as the first generation of neural network, and perceptrons are simply computational models of a single neuron. Perceptrons was originally coined by Frank Rosenblatt in his paper from 1956, titled The Perceptron, a probabilistic model for information storage and organization in the brain. As you can see in this diagram, there is an input layer, and there is a hidden layer, and there is an output layer. So this simple feed-forward neural network will learn the data from the input layer to make the pattern in the hidden layer and make and produce the output. These perceptrons require back propagations in the computational procedure, so it will give the network, we should give the network paired of datasets of inputs and the outputs, and let the perceptron learn and to make the decision from the dataset. The process from the inputs are sent into the neuron or the hidden layer, and then processed, analyzed by the system, and the result will be stored as an output, and the error being back from the output will be propagated to the input from the variation of the difference between the input and the output. And there is a limitation of this simple feed-forward neural network, that once we have hand-coded features, and as we can say, once we have determined how the network should think, there are very strong limitations on what it could learn more. Yeah, that's it. Move to the second one. The second one is pretty popular, the convolutional neural network, or CNN. This is a multi-layer neural network, but it is different with the other multi-layer neural network. This has a convolutional layer, so that is what makes it different with the other multi-layer network. CNN are primarily used in the image processing, but also can be used for other types input, such as audio. So it was started as LINET, named LINET, as a handwriting digits recognizer, and it uses backpropagation from feed-forward net with many hidden layers and a lot of clever ways of training of in a complete system, not just a recognizer. Yeah, as I said before, the typical use of CNN is for image processing, but you can also implement it in other input type. And this is the architecture of the first LINET, a CNN, simple CNN for digit recognition. Yeah. So the typical use case for CNN is where you feed the network images and then the network will classify the data based on the knowledge that it have. It tends to start with an input scanner, which is not intended to parse all the training data at once. So let's start with the next example. Like if you have to input an image of 100 times 100 pixels, you won't want a layer with 10,000 nodes. It will cost you a high computational cost. Rather, you will create a scanning input layer of say 10 times 10 pixels, which you feed the first 10 times 10 pixels of the image. And then once you have passed that input, you will feed it the next 10 by 10 by moving the scanner on 1 pixel to the right. So basically, each time you have to input 10 times 10 size of the matrix, and it will reduce the computational cost and will increase the accuracy and the performance, of course. I have a brief video explanation which is pretty good, but I'll just put the video link in the description box below. Let's move to the third algorithm architecture. So the third one is recurrent neural network, or RNN. This is pretty popular too. It's basically the perceptrons with connection between passes and connections through time. It uses sequence modeling, so it will turn the input sequence into the output sequence that lives in a different domain. Like you can get a teaching signal by trying to predict the next term in the input sequence, and the target output sequence is the input sequence with an advance of one step. It will predict the next term in a sequence blur. It predicts the next term in a sequence blurs the distinction between supervised and unsupervised learning. So basically, the supervised learning is when you feed all the feed a data set with all labeled data. So you have the input with the brief output, and you let the system analyze it. And the unsupervised learning is the method when you let the network to analyze the data based on some parameters that you give. And in RNN, it can do basically both, as I understand. So it uses methods designed for supervised learning, but it doesn't require a separate teaching signal. And yeah, as I said before, when you implement the supervised learning, you have to feed the network fixed data sets. Like from one data set, you have to separate it like for 80% or 75% as a training data, and you will use the other 25% or 20% as the testing data. But in this RNN, you don't have to do that. It uses memoryless model as a standard approach of the task, and this is very powerful though, because it combines two properties. The first one is the distributed hidden state that allows them to store a lot of information about the past efficiently. And the second is the nonlinear dynamics that allows them to update their hidden state in complicated ways. Yeah, this is the example of RNN architecture data sorting. There is one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-one, many-to-many, and the other neater type of many-to-many. I don't know what's the difference between them though, but if we see there are multiple data in the green bars that store the data. Yeah, maybe that is the point. But there is a problem, a kind of big problem with RNN, that is the vanishing or exploding gradient problem, where depending on the activation functions used, information rapidly gets lost over time. Although this wouldn't be much of a problem because there are just weights and not neuron states, but the weight is like a file storing your algorithm. But the wait store time is actually where the information from the past is stored. So yeah, there is this kind of problem in RNN. But still, it's suitable for advanced completing like auto completion or predicting the next term, since the RNN is quite good for predicting the next input. So it is good for auto completion or auto correction in your phone or in Google search. And the fourth is long short-term memory, or LSTM. Honestly, I don't really know how the proper way to read this architecture, but anyway, basically this is the RNN with the solve vanishing problem. The LSTM network tried to combat the vanishing problem by introducing gates and an explicitly defined memory cell. So before the weights file is used to store the past data, in this LSTM, the memory cell stores the previous values and holds onto it unless a forget gate tells to the cells to forget those values. This is the diagram of LSTM. This also have an input gate which adds new stuff to the cell, and an output gate which decides when to pass along the factors from the cell to the next hidden state. Yeah, there are at least 3 gates for this LSTM. The first is input gate, and the output gate, and the forget gate. And the fifth one is gated recurrent unit, or GRU. This is a slight variation of LSTM. In most cases, GRUs function very similar to LSTM, with biggest difference that is GRU are slightly faster and easier to run, but also slightly less expensive in the computational cost. So if you have a monster computer, it's okay. So don't think about it. And you can read more about GRU from Junyoung Chung's 2014 paper titled Empirical Evaluation of Gated Recurrent Neural Network on Sequence Modeling. One is HOPFIELD network. So this HOPFIELD network is a network where every neuron is connected to every other neuron. It is a completely entangled plate of spaghetti, as even all the nodes functions as everything, so everything is connected, and each node is input before training and then hidden during training and output afterwards. The network are trained by setting the value of the neurons to the desired pattern, after which the weights can be computed. And the weights do not change after this. Once trained for one or more patterns, the network will always converge to one of the learning patterns because of the network is only stable in those states. That's why it is interconnected between all other neurons. Instead of using the net to store memories, we use it to construct interpretations of sensory input. There is another computational role for Hopfield network instead of um, the input. I'm sorry. So the input is represented by the visible unit, and the interpretation is represented by the states of the hidden units. And the values of the interpretation is represented by the energy. This is the diagram of Hopfield network. Unfortunately, this has a limitation that shown that Hopfield net is very limited in its capacity. So a Hopfield net of n units can only memorize 0.15 n patterns because of the so-called spurious minima in its energy function. The spurious minima is the idea that since the energy function is continuous in the space of its wave, if two local minima are too close, they might fall into each other to create a single local minima which doesn't correspond to any training sample. While forgetting about the two sample it is supposed to memorize, this phenomenon significantly limits the number of samples that Hopfield can learn. Let's move to the seventh and our last net to be reviewed, the autoencoders. So this is the neural network that designed for unsupervised learning. Like I said before, when the data is not all labeled as a data compression model, it will represent a given input using less number of dimensions than originally present. So this use a data compression model, so they can be used to encode the input into a tighter and smaller dimension of the representation, and then it will decode accordingly. A decoder can be then used to reconstruct the input back from the encoded version with its own algorithm. And they work similar to principal component analysis, which is generally it used to represent a given input using less number of dimensions than the originally present. For example, in NLP, if you represent a word as a vector of 100 numbers, you could use PCA to represent it in 10 numbers. Of course, that will result in some of information loss, but it's still a good way to represent your input if you can only work with a limited number of dimensions. Also, it is a good way to visualize the data because you can easily plot the reduced dimension of a two-dimensional graph as opposed to a 100-dimensional vector. This is the graphic or the diagram of autoencoders. As I said before, they use the space reduction. They pack the data tightly into a latent space representation, and they can reconstruct the image. Also, nowadays the autoencoders are really used in practical application, mostly because in key areas for which they were once considered to be a breakthrough, such as layer-wise pre-training, it turned out that vanilla supervised learning, the other supervised learning, works better. But I won't explain it here. So yeah, that's it. That is my review of 7 architectures of neural network. And yeah, if in the conventional approach to programming, we tell the computer what to do, breaking big problems into many small, precisely defined tasks that the computer can easily perform. By contrast, in this neural network, we don't tell the computer how to solve problem. Instead, it learns from the observational data that we feed them, and it will figure out its own solution to the problem at hand. And today, neural network and deep learning achieve outstanding performance of many important problems in computer vision, speech recognition, and natural language processing. And they are being deployed on a large scale by high-tech and big high-tech companies such as Google, Microsoft, Facebook, etc. So yeah, that's it from my presentation. I hope that this video could help you maybe review some of the neural network architectures. And this is basically my course task from the uni. So I will, yeah, that's it. I'm from Indonesia, but I use English in this video because I want to practice my pronunciation and vocabulary. So if you are kind of hard to understand me, I apologize, and thank you for watching this. You can find the source, the article source of this video from the Medium article by James Lee titled "The 10 Neural Network Architectures Machine Learning Researchers Need to Learn." I will put the link below. Right. Thank you.